150,000 Catholics in Indianapolis. Okay, we're not going to have a cardinal down in this podunk archdiocese that's not really big, so we're going to send him out to Newark, New Jersey, where there's a lot more Catholics there. And he can exercise a wider scope of influence on the church around there. So you're now a cardinal. You're now one of the elite electors of the next pope. And you are given a titular church in Rome. So I think each of the cardinals, Cardinal Supic, Cardinal Tobin, all these cardinals, you get your own special church in Rome. So you get to go visit that church occasionally, and that's your own little fiefdom in Rome that you get. Okay? In addition to whatever responsibilities you have here in the United States, your own diocese. Now the Pope might ask you to serve on a council or some other leadership body in the Roman Curia if you were a cardinal, because you exercise that wider influence. Okay, now let's say you're still working your way up. You're not satisfied with just being a cardinal. You want to make it all the way to the top. So what happens next? What has to happen for you to be made pope? One has to die or resign, as we've seen recently. So somehow you have to get that pope to die or to resign. Now, hopefully that never happens. It may have happened in the past, who knows? But that's what has to happen. So there's a couple of weeks usually that happen between when a pope dies or resigns and the next conclave, which is when all the cardinals get together to elect the next pope. And the Vatican and the church is run by sort of a transitional body. And the cardinals get together in Rome for a couple of weeks just to, it's sort of like a lobby. It's like, okay, this is what the church needs to focus on in the future. We should elect a man with these type of qualities. And so if you really want to be pope, what happens is in the conclave, it's not just whoever gets the most votes. You have to get a 2/3 majority, all the votes in a given vote session of the conclave. Let's say conclave starts. You have, I think, 2 voting sessions per day, maybe 4, I don't remember exactly. But, you know, everyone's watching on the news, the cardinals get locked up, they have to hand over all their cell phones, every means of communication, and they're basically in solitary confinement with each other. They might take some time for spiritual retreat. I think the longest conclave lasted a couple of years. Thankfully, in recent years, they last only a couple of days. Pope Francis was elected, I think, only in like the 3rd or 4th ballot. It only took a couple of days for him to be elected. But you have to be elected by a 2/3 majority. So, one rationale for electing someone quickly is we all want to get out of here. We do not want to be here for months on end. That's what the cardinals are saying to each other. So let's team up and try to elect this one guy. Okay? So I don't know how it works because I've never been there. But usually that's how, I can only imagine if you have to be elected by 2/3 majority, that someone has to garner that support for this one particular man. Now, let's say you get that 2/3 majority. All of the cardinals go up with their own little ballots, right? It's not, let's raise our hands, who votes for Cardinal Bergoglio, right? That doesn't happen that way. They go up with their ballot that they've written down on, and they say this Latin phrase before the last judgment in the Sistine Chapel. So, I will keep this a secret to myself. I won't reveal any of this to anyone outside, lest this happen to me, the last judgment that I'm looking at up there. Okay, so they give their seal of approval and they dump their little ballot in there. One by one, then the cardinals, the electors, start reading off the names. So let's say you garner 2/3 votes. So we have elected Cardinal Jorge Bergoglio. They go up to him and they say, in Latin, you have been elected as the next pope. Do you accept? And so usually they say, I accept. So they give him a standing ovation. The pope goes off and vests in his new thing, gives them a new name, or what his new name will be, and then goes out and greets everyone at the balcony of St. Peter. That's the way to work your way to the top in the church. So if any of you ever want to do that, be my guest. But I do not want to deal with any more problems than I get to as a priest. which is a joyful life, by the way. But that's the hierarchy of the church in a nutshell. So I hope that I didn't go way over my time, but I hope you were all very enriched by the experience today. So thank you very much. Do you have any questions?
What is the relationship between the cardinal and the bishop?
I can hear you, but the camera can't, so that's why you need the microphone.
My question is this: what is the relationship between the cardinal and the bishops? What authority does a cardinal have over a bishop?
Okay, what authority does a cardinal have over a bishop? Okay, a cardinal does not necessarily have to be a bishop. All right, so a cardinal really, the only purpose of having a cardinal, in all practicality's sake, is you are participating in electing the next pope. So what happens with cardinals, I didn't mention this, is that once you reach the age of 80, you're no longer eligible to elect the next pope or to take part in the election. I guess you could still go to a conclave, but you don't get to submit a ballot for the next pope. So you always have to have, I think the number is 120. The pope always has to have 120 cardinals under the age of 80. Now there are probably, I don't know, 80 more over the age of 80 who are still around. But the authority that a cardinal has, it might refer to his authority as a bishop. So usually they're archbishops. So Cardinal Supich has authority over his own archdiocese, the Archdiocese of Chicago. He is the metropolitan for the province of Chicago, which is the whole state of Illinois. He has some authority over those bishops, but not like a ton. So I think back in the old ages of the church, they had more authority as far as like deposing a bad bishop, getting rid of one, or maybe sending him off to a faraway diocese, right? There's a Latin phrase that's, I don't know if it's still key today, but back in the day it was. It was called promoveatur ut moveatur, which is promote in order to move them far away. Right? So, oh yeah, I think he'd be a great Archbishop of Seattle, Washington. Send him way out there, okay? So he's far away from me, right? So oftentimes that's what they do. If they didn't like their leader, they would promote him somewhere far away so they wouldn't have to deal with it. So cardinals do, they exercise that type of authority now over a bishop. Now Cardinal Supich has authority over his auxiliary bishops in the Archdiocese of Chicago because he has full authority over that archdiocese. But over, let's say, the Bishop of Gary, he doesn't have any authority because he's not in, Bishop Hein is not in the province of Illinois. So does that answer your question?
Yes, Opus Dei, I believe, has a prelate, and the Hospitallers have a prelate that they're only accountable to him and he's only accountable to the Pope. What exactly is a prelate?
Okay. Yes, that's a good question. So you raised the question about the prelate of Opus Dei. So Opus Dei is kind of unique because it's the only what we call personal prelature in the church, which means that you have, I'm trying to express this, I'm not really familiar with it, but you have, you could have clergy who are part of it. You can also have laity who are part of it. So it's, in a sense, very much a lay apostolate. So a big part of the spirituality of Opus Dei is relying on the laity to bring the gospel to those, you know, in their everyday lives, working in the world in their everyday jobs and in their vocation. So what happens is they are under the authority of their own prelate, who is also usually a bishop. So all those who are in Opus Dei would be under their pope. Now, if you are a member of Opus Dei in this diocese, you are still under the authority of your bishop here, so Bishop Hein. But I think if you are numerary, supernumerary. If you have a certain title in the prelature, then your prelate, which is that bishop of that organization, exercises that authority over you. And he is answerable to the Pope only. So he is able to report to the Pope, the prelate. The Hospitallers, I'm not too familiar with them, so I can't really say much for that. But yes, Opus Dei is the only one of its kind personal prelature. You have all of these religious orders, and those superiors are answerable to the Pope alone. So you have, for instance, secular clergy and the secular church. For instance, I'm a secular priest, but then you have religious, which is the other branch. So religious priests like Franciscans, Jesuits, Dominicans, Benedictines, they have their own superiors. So those superiors they serve as sort of like bishops. They would be on equal ground to Bishop Hein. They exercise authority over that religious order. Okay.
As a priest of your own parish, are you free to obey or disobey a mandate by the bishop?
Am I free to obey or disobey a mandate by Bishop Hein? If I'm smart, I would never disobey. Luckily, Bishop Hein doesn't wield a ton of authority, especially for ones who might be disobedient. He's very pastoral, as many of you know. Some of you probably had him over for dinner sometimes, because he's visited a lot of homes and parish functions. I guess as a priest, what you do on your ordination day is, part of the rite is you put your hands between the hands of your bishop. He asks you the question, do you promise respect and obedience to me and my successors? And so you kind of have to answer, I do, or he's not going to ordain you, right? So that doesn't just mean respect and obedience to him, but it's whatever bishop comes after him. Because it's not necessarily to Bishop Hying that I'm making that commitment to, but it's to the Bishop of Gary. He occupies that office. So Bishop Melchek, God bless him, but he's the Bishop Emeritus, so he no longer exercises that authority over the diocese or over me, because now Bishop Hying is in that office. So I don't know if I could really say no to something like that. I might be asked me to do something, and I don't really want to do it. I could sit down and say, you know what, Bishop, I might have a better idea. Not that I would have a better idea, but he's very consultative, and most bishops are. Sometimes, for instance, when you get an assignment, right? So there wasn't really any wiggle room, and it's smart for me as a newly ordained priest not to say, you know what, I really don't want to go to St. Patrick, but how about, why don't you send me out to California? I want to be in Beverly Hills.
Good luck with that.
Right. So I promised to give service to Bishop Hying and to the Diocese of Gary for the rest of priestly ministry, because they sponsored my education, and this is where I'm from. So if he assigns you to a parish, it's wise of you to accept that. Now, if you think that some changes might need to be made, you can consult with your bishop and try to change his mind. But ultimately, he has authority over you. So it's not like a blind obedience, but it's obedience, yes, to an extent.
How much authority does a church hierarchy have over the nuns?
Over the nuns? I guess you might be getting to what was sort of in the news a lot the last few years. So certain groups of women's religious in the United States, I'm trying to refresh my own memory with this, but there were some questions, and a lot of these questions were sent to the Vatican as far as, what the groups of nuns might have been teaching, certain emphasis they might have put on certain issues while maybe avoiding other issues. Those were some of the concerns. And so ultimately, the Pope does have this authority, and so he relies on, for instance, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. If you're teaching something contrary to the faith or teaching something that might be considered heretical, then the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, the prefect, Pope Benedict was in that position for many years. They investigate that and they come to a conclusion, and they might recommend to the Pope, you might need to put sanctions on this certain group of, for instance, women's religious. But I don't know exactly what type of authority in the exact, to the exact extent that you might be looking for. I guess if they're teaching something that's contrary to the faith, they could be sanctioned or castigated in a certain way. But I'm not sure exactly the authority. They probably could be silenced as well if they persisted in doing something that was contrary. And not saying that they did anything that was contrary, but there were questions, and so there's investigations that have to go on in the church to make sure that everything is going well. Okay. But ultimately, a lot of the religious groups are under the authority of their own superiors. But if it's a conglomeration of lots of different religious orders, for instance, the women's group, where a lot of different religious orders coming together, then ultimately that would fall under Rome's authority.
I don't understand, like at the last session they mentioned somebody that was both a priest and a monk. Can you explain to me a little bit about what a monk is and does and how they fall amongst all this?
Okay, so as I said, you have secular clergy and you have religious clergy. So I'm a diocesan secular priest. Most of the priests in the Diocese of Gary are diocesan secular priests. Now we do have a lot of religious groups in our diocese. We have the Legionaries of Christ, we have Franciscans, we have Carmelites, we have the Salvatorians, we have the group of the Associates of the Immaculate Conception from Colombia. Lots of different religious order priests. So they can be priests while still being religious, in a religious order. So you could be a brother or a sister in a religious order and not be like a priest, but you could also be a priest. So you're not only making your priestly promises, but you're making vows to a certain community. Now with a monk means that you live in community and that you would live in like a monastery. If any of you are familiar with St. Meinrad Archabbey, those brothers, those priests and brothers down there would be called monks because they live in a monastery. Now some of them might be completely cloistered and cut off, but some of them are open. So some of them are professors at the seminary down there. But they are considered monks. Some of them are just brothers and are not priests, but a lot of them are priests. So you could be sent to pursue priesthood, or you could decide to remain a brother. I'm not sure how it works in each community, but you can be a monk and a priest. But I don't have to pledge any vows to any certain religious community or charism. I give priestly promises to the bishop of the Diocese of Gary.
Any more questions? I guess that's it, Father.
Thank you very much.
Did it excellent. Excellent. There are, I have two little announcements. There